Nichol Kessinger know? And when did she know it?
Chris Watts' former cellmate claimed that Chris sent a woman he'd been dating, Nichol Kessinger, at least 2 letters.
Who was obsessed with who? Was Chris Watts in contact with Nichol Kessinger?
This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
Okay, you guys, we're going to be talking more about the Chris Watts, Nichol Kessinger case. This is a lot. My name is Jessica Della Davies. I'm an investigative journalist. My job is to investigate crime scenes, criminals, and potential suspects along with evidence, and to teach you how to do the same thing. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give this a thumbs up so I know you were here. Now, everything I'm sharing on this case is my opinion, and this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Today, we're going to delve more deeply into NK's second interview with law enforcement. We're going to talk about her lies, her obstruction of justice, in my opinion. This second interview was conducted on August the 16th of 2018. I'm also going to talk about D.A. Rourke and some of the more controversial statements he's been making lately regarding the Chris Watts case and specifically about Nichol Kessinger. And I'm going to share with you a massive bombshell of what I believe shows guilty knowledge on NK's part. So get this, Nichol Kessinger was discussing with Agent Kovac a bunch of stuff about Survey 319. You'll recall that's where Chris Watts put his 2 daughters, Bella and Cece, and buried Shanann. He put the girls into the oil tank and he buried Shanann and her unborn baby in a hole in the ground, face down. Just kind of rattles around with a bunch of random stuff, and then she drops this. She slides in the fact that she texted Chris Watts and demanded that he send her a photo proving he was at Survey 319. She texts Chris Watts and demands that he send her a photo demanding proof that Chris Watts was at Survey 319 on the day that his family disappeared. Why does she want this? What day did she text him demanding this information? Well, she requested this photograph on the day that his whole entire family disappeared. And I'm going to share with you Chris Watts' final text message to NK in just a moment, so please stay with me. Monday night, just after Chris Watts has taken out his entire family, she's texting him demanding proof that he's at Survey 319. Why? Why does she want to know this? Why does she suddenly want proof, photographic proof, that he was at that site? When I covered the Alex Murdaugh case, I was accused of being anti-law enforcement. When I cover the Brian Kohlberger case, I am accused of being pro-law enforcement. I am neither. I'm about following the evidence and where it leads. And in this case, I think law enforcement and the DA's office should have investigated NK, especially in light of all of her behavior, including allegedly demanding a photograph of where Chris Watts disposed of his family. This is very sketchy, in my opinion. So, at first, investigators thought NK was an accomplice in this case. So why didn't they push back more on her lies? Why didn't they trust their initial instincts when she was at the very least committing obstruction of justice by deleting all of the information related to Chris Watts off her cell phone and telling him to do the exact same thing? So in an interview with the Denver Post, NK claimed to be as startled as others by the unraveling of this case. She said, quote, "I don't think there's a logical explanation for what he did. It's a senseless act. It's horrific." And about her interactions with Chris Watts, she said, quote, "We had just met. I barely knew him. When he spoke to me, he was very soft-spoken. He appeared to be a good listener." She also claims that Chris Watts told her about the fact that he was getting a divorce, saying, quote, "I believed him. He made me believe that he was doing all of the things that a rational and good man would do." But we know this is not true. Before she ever arrived to take that job at Anadarko. And if you haven't seen my other video that I did last week on this case, you will want to watch that next, because I talk about the jealousy that I believe she felt toward Shanann. So she wanted to know, does a man marry his mistress? Again, she knew that this guy was married. So now I want to be clear that Chris Watts is 100% responsible for what he did. Let's consider what a cold, calculating monster this guy is. Footage from a 7-Eleven showed Chris Watts just a short time after doing away with his entire family, casually grabbing himself some breakfast. And he had no empathy for his family. So why was NK at the Watts' home at 6 a.m. on August 13th of 2018, the day Chris Watts did away with his entire family? Was she just being controlling? Did she have some knowledge of what was happening that day? Let's go back to law enforcement's initial feeling that NK was somehow involved. This is the same feeling that so many of you have voiced to me in the comment section, not just on last week's videos, but on the other series that I did on NK. We only know about the 6 a.m. phone ping because Jim called her. How long had she been sitting outside the house prior to this? Had she been there for an hour? A minute? How long did she sit there after? NK's nonsense about not knowing about Shanann being pregnant is unlikely with how controlling she was being with Chris Watts. She was looking for apartments on his behalf. She was counting his macros for his diet that he was on. She knew the amount that Chris and Shanann had for their mortgage payment. So it's really hard to believe that NK was not looking up Shanann on her Facebook. And remember, Shanann's Facebook was set to public, so NK would have seen that Shanann was pregnant. In a lengthy interview with authorities obtained by Inside Edition, NK discussed her final communication with Chris Watts, and I'm going to share with you Chris's final text message to NK in just a moment, so please stay with me. Shortly after news broke about his missing family, she said, quote, "I texted Chris one last time and I told him, if you did anything bad, you're going to ruin your life. You're going to ruin my life. I promise you that." However, if NK had any suspicion at all that Chris Watts did something bad, then why didn't she hold on to her text messages? Why didn't she reach out to law enforcement? Instead, she deleted everything and tried to destroy her SIM card. This sounds to me like someone who was worried about herself, not Shanann, not Bella, not Cece, not Nico, herself. NK said Chris Watts did respond to her in his final text message saying, quote, "I didn't hurt my family, Nikki." Now, I don't know whether to believe this or not because Nikki is spelled incorrectly. And it could just be that the journalist was taking her word for it, because we have never seen these text messages from Chris Watts to NK. What was on Chris Watts' cell phone, and why wasn't this released to the public? I want to talk a little bit about how Cece, Bella, Shanann, and Nico were found. I'm going to watch my words here. This is according to the crime report. So the girls were placed separately into these 2 oil tanks, and authorities found Cece first, and then later they found Bella. And Shanann was dressed in a t-shirt, bra, and panties, and she was found in a hole face down. And in my opinion, Chris Watts disposed of her in a way to humiliate her. He had her in the fetal position, face down, with her backside up in the air. And I just think this was such a everything about what he did was disrespectful, from the way he got rid of his children to the way he got rid of Shanann and his unborn child. Leading up to this, NK searched Google for wedding dresses for over 2 hours. This was on August the 4th of 2018. This is just 9 days before Chris Watts takes out his family. She also Googled topics like marrying your mistress, but yet NK's going to claim to journalists and to law enforcement that she didn't know. Now think about the way that Trent Bolt was interrogated by Agent Tammy Lee and Graham Coder. They interrogated Trent Bolt. Remember, he was that saying he had a 10-month-long relationship with Chris Watts back in 2018. These agents cut right through his nonsense and called him out. But in contrast, NK lied to law enforcement over and over with no pushback. Why didn't law enforcement pursue anything against NK? Well, in my opinion, they didn't know that Chris Watts was going to confess. They would have no way of knowing that he was going to confess to doing the crimes. So they were largely looking at a circumstantial case. They were probably worried about making the case. And just like we saw with Adam Montgomery and Kayla Montgomery, the prosecution made a deal with the devil. In the Adam Montgomery, Harmony Montgomery case, they used Kayla Montgomery, who in my opinion is just almost as culpable as Adam for sitting by and watching this happen and doing nothing. And I feel like they had to do this with NK as well. They had to make a deal with her to get Chris Watts. They didn't vet out the information that she was giving because she was telling so many lies that had they been vetting out the information, they would have known. So to be able to say they didn't know, they simply just didn't vet the information. This is just my opinion in looking through all of this. So I believe she got some kind of an immunity deal in exchange for her being willing to testify at the trial for Chris Watts, which never took place because he ultimately decided to plead guilty. In no way saying that Chris Watts is innocent in any of this or that she somehow made him do it. He is 100% responsible for doing what he did. But I do feel like NK helped set into motion a cascade of events that led up to Bella, Cece, Nico, and Shanann all being done away with. Law enforcement had to know she was lying. If you look at how they interviewed Chris Watts and called out his lies, and even interviewed that weird guy that came forward and said he had had an affair with Chris Watts. They interviewed him and called out his lies. But with NK, they didn't call out any of her lies. And I do think that this is because they believed that they needed her testimony to get Chris Watts into prison. So there have been rumors swirling for years that NK's father was somehow part of law enforcement. I don't know. I haven't been able to find any evidence that he's part of law enforcement. It doesn't mean that he's not. It just means I have not been able to find it. Or that somehow he had all this influence. But it may just be that they had leverage over law enforcement because they knew that law enforcement needed NK's testimony to get Chris Watts, and that her father understood this. Once NK got the immunity deal that she wanted, then she agreed to turn over her cell phone. Then NK was able to go meet with law enforcement without him there. And I believe that she did this on subsequent interviews because she had a deal in place with the prosecution at that point, with the DA's office. And DA Rourke made a deal with her because he needed her testimony to get Chris Watts behind bars. There are also rumors that NK had a criminal record. I did some digging, and yes, she does, and here is her mugshot. So remember back on August 16th of 2018 in that interview that she did, she said that it was common for guys like Chris to go to sites like Survey 319. That's what she told the agent that she was meeting with, right? So why would she have needed photographic proof that he was at the Survey 319? Why on the day that he does away with his entire family is she demanding proof that he was at Survey 319? So let's continue to unpack this whole interview with NK, because there's so much to unpack here. So if you think the NK suspicion just stops with the Survey 319 demanding that image in a text message on the day that Chris Watts took out his family, it doesn't just stop there. She deleted all of the text messages and photographs off of her phone, and she told him to do the same thing. She also encouraged her friend, Charlotte Nelson, to delete her messages between NK and Charlotte Nelson off of her phone. That's obstruction of justice, in my opinion. But nothing to see here, folks, according to D.A. Rourke. According to NK's own statements, Chris Watts had told her that his family was missing. So she knew that a pregnant Shanann and 2 little girls were all missing. So why would she just go delete all of her information off her cell phone, encourage him to do the same thing, and her friend to do the same thing? And she tried to destroy her SIM card. I don't know, you guys. This stinks to high heaven. On the night of August 14th, she knew that Chris Watts' family is missing at this point. And what is she looking up? She's looking up any kind of news she can find on what happened to Shanann and the girls. But what else did she search? And this search is really interesting. She searches how to delete your text messages and can law enforcement read your text messages once they are deleted. NK deleting her text messages, this would be considered obstruction of justice because that would have been evidence at that point. And she knew at that point that Shanann and the girls were missing. So that could have been brought, but it wasn't. And again, I believe it's because she had an immunity deal with the prosecution. One of the other things that was so revealing in this interview with NK and Agent Kovac was Agent Kovac asks NK if she communicated with Chris Watts on any other apps. And she says no. But that's not true because we know she was sending him photographs using that calculator app. Moreover, she accidentally lets it slip out to the special agent that she Skyped with Chris. Now, Skype can be video message. That's an app, right? But you can also text message with somebody on Skype. So again, another lie. Where are the Skype records? Why have we not been privy to these Skype records? And you'll recall during the Alex Murdaugh case that Paul Murdaugh actually solved his own crime, right? It was a Snapchat video. Well, guess who else used Snapchat? Chris Watts did. Chris Watts was using Snapchat in July when he was seeing NK, an app that automatically deletes stuff that you post to it. Was he communicating with NK on Snapchat? And if so, why don't we have those messages? Another big problem that we have is that on August 13th, NK didn't clock in to Anadarko. What time did she arrive at work? We know her phone pinged at around 6 a.m. near the Watts home, which wasn't on her way to work. It wasn't in the vicinity of her own home. So why was she hanging out at Chris Watts' house at 6 a.m. on the morning that he does away with his entire family? Did she have some kind of forewarning and something that he said that made her concerned that she went over there to find out what he was going to do? Why was her phone pinging, and where was she that morning? Why didn't she clock into work? Did law enforcement follow up with her coworkers to find out what time she arrived to work that morning? Because all we have is her clocking out that day. A lot of people think that Nichol Kessinger helped Chris Watts, and I don't know if that is true or not true, but I'm going to continue to follow the evidence and bring you all of the information so you can make up your own mind in this case. So if you haven't seen part 1 in this investigation into Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger, you'll want to watch that next. I will link it for you in the description below, and be on the lookout for part 3. I do believe that Chris Watts is 100% responsible. Finally, I want to leave you with this one disturbing detail, and that is that Chris Watts named his unborn son, Nico, Lee. And what is Nicole's name? Nichol, Nikki, Nico. And her middle name is Lee. Please subscribe, leave me a comment, and let me know what you think about all of this.